Cool. Yeah, that started. Welcome to the GESScast, where we explore the intersection of education, innovation, and the future of learning. I'm Millie, and today we're thrilled to have a special guest who has spent over 20 years shaping the future of education. Dr. Maggie Broderick is an associate professor and dissertation chair at National University, a leader in curriculum development, and a passionate advocate for social emotional learning, or SEL, in both K-12 and higher education settings. Dr. Broderick has spearheaded multiple initiatives aimed at fostering the emotional and social well-being of students, making her a key voice in this transformative area of education. So today we're going to dive into how SEL is reshaping learning environments, helping students thrive academically and emotionally, and how schools can embrace this approach in a meaningful way. So Maggie, welcome to the GESScast.
Thanks so much, Millie. It's great to be here today.
All right. So you've had a really diverse career in education. Could you tell us what sparked your interest in curriculum development and SEL and how your journey's led to where you are today?
Sure. Yeah, it is quite a story over the last few decades. I guess I could say I've always been a teacher at heart. I always like to say that phrase. When I was young, I studied music really intensely. I'm a flute player. And I thought, maybe I want to play flute in a symphony or something. But quickly I realized the thing that really made my heart happy and sing, so to speak, was if somebody asked me, hey, how did you do that on the flute? Like, how did you figure this out? And the same was true with other things, doing crafts or things like that. I realized that I was happy if I was, sort of sharing my understanding of things with others. So I became a music teacher and continued along and became a professor. And it's just been my calling. So I do kind of get nerdy about things. I kind of dive in. It's a good quality for a researcher and a scholar. So I kind of did that also with curriculum. Like I would dive right in and learn about how to engineer a really good curriculum. Super cool stuff. And then also with SEL, I kind of realized diving into that with my colleague, Dr. Amy Lynn, a few years back, that, honestly, there's a framework for some of the things that I kind of felt in me all along. And that's really what SEL is sort of an inward kind of human understanding. So it was really cool to dive into that in a nerdy way as well and learn more about that.
Awesome. And social emotional learning has become a bit of a buzzword in education these days. So for those who are a bit more unfamiliar, how would you define SEL? Why is it so critical to student success?
Well, I think a lot of us think about school, no matter what age, for just the grades, right? Getting your academics in your classes. And I'll admit, I'm a parent and I have 3 kids. My youngest is 13, and I'll be looking at the grades like, oh, how are you doing in math, right? But it's really so much more important. We're forming human beings. We're going to go out beyond that math classroom. And social emotional learning, SEL, is not a new idea. It's just that we sort of have some new approaches, strategies, and resources, and some organizations who have started framing the idea of sort of, those human things that are harder to measure in a way we can have a shared language. So we might have referred to it previously as maybe soft skills. It's the
Mm.
things like understanding ourself as a human and understanding others, communication, empathy, self-regulation, and reflection. It's about ongoing and continuous personal growth and relationships. But one organization that's really that I've learned a lot about, and that a lot of teachers, particularly here in the U.S., will cite is CASEL, CASEL. CASEL website is really great if you just kind of want to see a framework. So we have that shared language. And so the idea is that, it's really there are 5 competencies that are for all ages and stages of human development. It's not just something you teach when you're 7 or when you're 13. It's self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision making, relationship skills, and social awareness. And that's for everyone. I mean, literally, everyone can think about that at any stage of life in developmentally appropriate ways. And so when I kind of worked with my colleague, Dr. Lynn, on this, her framework that we looked at was thinking about self-awareness as key there and thinking about that for teachers. And that was really helpful for me to think about this framework and kind of take those things that we have inside of ourselves. If we're good teachers and we love to teach, it's kind of in us all along.
Yeah. And something you said earlier, like I think it's such an important thing as school and education, you're not just preparing them to sort of do your job at work. It's so much more beyond that. It's about living in the world, and all those soft skills are just so critical.
Mhm, mhm.
So you've been involved in both K-12 and higher education settings. How do the strategies for implementing SEL differ across the age groups? And has there been any key lessons learned from doing that?
Sure. Yeah, I love teaching. It doesn't matter what age. And I love that light bulb, when you see someone learn
Yeah.
something new, right? And you can see that in a 3-year-old, or I had a student online. I mostly teach online these days, who was in her 80s. So everything up through
Wow.
there, it's incredible. And you can see that light bulb. And so a huge part of that I found is what some people call meeting the point of need learning, right? So if somebody needs the information right now and is ready for it right now, and you're able to be there and be responsive, that is what is engaging and moves them forward and is very motivating. So I find that, like I said, with a 3-year-old or an 80-year-old, like, hey, maybe the 3-year-old's learning music and you give them the mallets for the percussion instrument, and they go, oh, I can do this with my hands. Or the 80-year-old who maybe, was in my online classroom and needed to think about some technological tools. I needed to make sure that those things were there for her. Most importantly, it was communication and like building that relationship and rapport. Somebody like an online learner, most of my students are, maybe in their 40s or something, and they're pretty self-directed. They're busy. They've got a family. They got all kinds of stuff. They're self-directed, but if they get stuck and if they get anxious, it stalls their learning. So there's all kinds of things when someone really needs, just to have that accessibility and communication and that engagement with the person who's there to help them with when they do need it, whether it's a whole bunch, like the 3-year-old might need a whole lot of, availability for that, or somebody who's mostly doing things on their own but might get anxious and stuck. If we have that relationship and rapport with the learner, it drives momentum and engagement, and it really helps them. And then they're happy. It's sort of teaching the whole person, and they're able to really thrive.
Yeah, that's so important. And have you found much difference teaching online versus in person? I don't know if that's a new thing for you or sort of from COVID, or whether you've been teaching online for a long time. But I wonder if you have to take a different approach or there's any challenges with that.
Oh, yeah, I would say so. And it's funny because some people really thrive with it and others don't do as well with it. So we're still learning. Like you said, COVID was a huge point when people kind of jumped into this because they had to. But,
Yeah.
for me, I started in 2008 or 2009 with online teaching, and it just
Okay.
suited me. Yeah, I really like it. But now we get so many people preferring that, just like remote work, right? So it's
Yeah.
a huge amount of people who are like, I would much rather have this life, this lifestyle. It's super that we have the tech for it. But I do find some people do struggle. My son has mentioned he'd rather do things in person right now at this stage in his life, and maybe later on he would change. I think it just
Mhm.
depends. But I do find that other supports are needed. It's much harder to kind of build that rapport and kind of reach across the screen. I mean, you and I are across the world from each other right now, which is incredible, and we can do certain
Mm.
things, which is great. But other things are a little trickier, like reading somebody's, reading the room, I would say, kind of reading somebody's anxiety
Yeah.
or body language and things like this, and knowing when somebody really needs help. If you see them in the classroom and you kind of read the room, you go, oh, well, I can go and help. A little bit trickier, especially asynchronously online.
Yeah. And do you find engagement can differ as well? Because I think it depends on the person, doesn't it? Of like whether they prefer in person and online, I suppose as well. But my thought is maybe some people would struggle to sort of remain engaged. Sometimes it's different when you have a presence in the room for teacher, um,
Yeah.
to sort of make you do the work. And maybe it depends on the age of the student as well.
I think you're right. I think there's like myriad factors to consider. I did
Yeah.
notice with my own children during COVID, it was a terrible struggle, and I know I'm not alone there. Like just saying, "Hey, do it today. We'll have ice cream afterwards." You got to
Yeah.
get it done. Like anything to just get them to do it. It was such a hard time. Some people, are so motivated, and I have doctoral students. They really want that degree. They really want to engage, and as long as we don't derail them and they're not too anxious, they can fly and do awesome. Others, they're there for different reasons. It's very much the drive behind and the motivation behind why they're in that classroom.
Yeah. That makes sense. And one of the pillars of SEL is creating a supportive school climate. So, what are some of the actionable steps that educators or administrators can take to make this a reality in their own schools?
Yeah, I think it comes from two directions. I've been thinking about this a lot lately. Like, what is the best sort of approach? And it depends so much on what you're given. If you're in a school where things are already sort of this way, you approach it differently. And if you're not, maybe there are forces working against you. It's interesting here, Millie, in the US, there are certain states where we are not really embracing SEO, to put it mildly, and we're actually
Yeah,
fighting against it, and others where we are. And so it kind of depends. So whichever environment you find yourself in, you could start from the top to bottom. Leadership says, yay, SEL is wonderful. Let's all have a school climate. Or maybe it's not like that, and you're very small in your own little pocket, in your own little classroom, starting very small and working from the bottom up. But I find, it could go in either direction and be successful because, SEL under any different name is still, it's just a framework. So it's really, something you could implement in any of those situations. But I think a lot about how teachers, I don't know the stats anywhere else in the world, like in the UK, but in the US, we have enormous amounts of teachers leaving the profession in the first 5 years. Huge amounts of attrition. And I think if we have systems that do support from the top down and it's not the teacher having to build from the bottom up, then it really is better for things like burnout and taking care of that, because that teacher is a human too. And they have social emotional needs and they need to have that sort of, understanding in the environment. So if we do have it from the top down, I think that's super. But if it's not possible, building up from the bottom up does make a difference too. And you can start sort of growing that garden slowly with
yeah.
planting some seeds.
I have two friends actually in that situation. They both ended up in different routes. One's a primary school teacher and one's a secondary school teacher. But one of them has, did her training, and then after a couple of years, she was also became qualified during COVID. And I think that on top of um, starting with just so much going on and like not enough support, she's ended up leaving. And the other one's carried on. But even still, with the both of them, I see how much stress and how much work it is. Like to some extent, I'm not surprised that so many people leave. But it's also sad because I know they love their job and they love the kids and what they do. Um, but there's just so much work to be done in supporting those teachers.
Yeah, yeah, the emotion labor that we put out, if somebody really does care
Yeah,
and teach from the heart and really puts themselves into it, they need that replenished.
yeah. And that actually leads me nicely into my next question because yeah, we all know it's not just for the students, SEL. It's the whole school community, the teachers, even the parents as well. Everyone's involved in that. And how can you see SEL benefiting educators? And how can they support their students' emotional well-being whilst maintaining their own as well? Because you can't give from an empty cup.
Exactly,
Mm.
exactly. And I remember, I mean, I started teaching about 30 years ago. And I was quite young, in my early 20s. And I just remember crying a lot and being like, wow, this is really hard. And I do believe it's gotten harder in some ways. Other ways, technology and stuff maybe made some things easier some of the time. But
Mm.
overall, emotionally, and also here in the US, some of the things that we have going on, scary things, school shootings and things like that. Really,
Yeah.
very stressful. Worries me a lot. So when we think about it, some things have gotten quite a bit harder. And I think if we think about that whole person and realize why we're there, sort of like you said earlier, it's about developing this human that will go off into the world, right? The same is true for the teacher. Think beyond that. Sometimes, personally, for myself, if things get stressful or I have trouble, like the cup, don't have enough to fill my cup. I need some things within myself, like just going for a walk, being in nature. And when we call it self-care, I think it's kind of hard because if you don't have enough to give, you have to give to yourself, and then that's an awful lot
Yeah.
too. But if we can tell each other, hey, I'm going to go for a walk. You want to come with me? Oh, hey, I'm going to just, look at this tomorrow and I'll feel better tomorrow. Maybe we'll both do that. Encouraging each other, I think that helps, and hopefully from leadership as well, because if we have that, and we have that self-awareness that, yeah, things are going bad today. I got got a lot going on and a lot of things I have to think about. And these parents got angry today, and there was a drill for, some kind of scary situation or something. Just take a moment and see if you can. Everyone can support each other in saying, okay, tomorrow's another day. Let's take a breather. It's hard to do on your own. I think a whole community has to do that for each other.
Yeah. That's a nice thought as well of like a teacher helping a teacher, because in my head I just automatically think leadership helping the teachers. But actually, yeah, I mean, we do it in our workspace here. It's, you look overwhelmed with that. It's already been a long day and you're working late. I'm going to probably head off now as well. I feel like we've worked hard today, but let's shut our laptops, get a nice rest, and let's have a crack at it in the morning. Because
Yeah.
everyone reaches a point, with any job that you can only give so much in one day. And you
Yep.
just will burn yourself out otherwise.
100%. My favorite book as a kid was Anne of Green Gables, and they say tomorrow is always fresh with no mistakes in it. So, okay, start
I
fresh
like that.
tomorrow. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the best way. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we mentioned the pandemic a little bit already, and it's brought I think just well-being in general into focus. It's so much more talked about, so much more accepted now, I think. People are much more open about talking about it. So have you seen any shifts or innovations in the way that SEL is now integrated post-pandemic? And do you believe there's going to be any long-term impacts on education?
It really was something, right? I can't believe that was 4
Mm.
years ago. When I think through,
Yeah,
we're in another election cycle now, and I'm like, oh, that was 2020 last time we were in election cycle. Wow, it's very interesting to think it was 4 years
so
ago,
different.
right? So incredibly,
Yeah.
yeah. And so I don't know. I think when I think about that time, it made a lot of us more aware of the word trauma, actually. And
Mm.
at National University, where I do most of my work, we do align our SEL frameworks with our trauma-informed education frameworks. And in that way, I think that would be something that's a lesson for all of us to understand sort of when people have a shared trauma or an individual trauma, whether large or small, all kinds of things, people are a little more aware now, like, oh, that's what that might feel like for a person, the empathy of that. And so
Mm.
thinking about things like generational trauma, we have a lot of that in our society, in different communities here, understanding sort of an agreed upon language for when someone might be struggling with something they've gone through in their lives, which you might not know happened to them, or maybe everyone, during COVID had a similar thing happening. It's very real for so many students. So trauma-informed issues, I think we have to think about alongside with SEL. I come from a language background too. I love music and language. And I have a colleague, Lori Bedford, who's been doing that nerdy deep dive into something I love. It's Krashen's affective filter hypothesis. And in language learning, Krashen back in the 80s said, if you're anxious and you are in an environment where you're feeling like all keyed up, you can't get the input and output to get to the next level of language learning. And I agree with what Dr. Bedford and others have been starting to look at, that that's not just about language. If you are anxious, it's sort of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You're like, oh, I'm shut down, I'm not learning. Probably going to struggle with your math learning today, and maybe your social emotional learning, everything. So I think it's called, reducing that affective filter, lowering, that's Krashen's word for it, lowering the affective filter is a huge part when we think about trauma informed and SEL and how that all kind of goes together these days and what we need to think about.
So interesting to hear. I'm already thinking about like how that works if you're having, think about it when you have a bad day, but I've not thought about how anxiety and stuff can affect you taking in that information and, remembering it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And you've done significant research on this topic. Do you have any impactful findings or case studies that you want to share that maybe illustrate the potential of SEO and transforming school environments, especially as it
Yeah,
starts to more and more now?
sure. I mean, my colleagues and I did dive in. It was, like we were saying about 4 years ago, it was such an interesting time, definitely incredibly difficult with, traumas in a lot of ways for people in various ways. large and small. But at the same time, my colleagues and I, at the beginning, we thought COVID would be a little shorter, as we all kind of thought.
Yeah.
So we were like, oh, we'll do a research study on this interesting period and kind of do that nerdy scholar hat. And so we looked at doctoral students and their chairs and that relationship, the dissertation chair and the student. And then we kept going because COVID kept going. And so we looked at secondary teachers and their students during the time of COVID-19 and kind of that shift to online learning. So that was something we looked at. There is some existing research on SEL that's just growing like in leaps and bounds every day with new connections like, oh, what about SEL with this or that? We've looked at it with teacher dispositions. That was, again, my colleague, Dr. Lynn, and I kind of looking at, what is it about that teacher? If I ask people, what do you remember most about your favorite teacher? It's their disposition. It's kind of who they were inside. It's not that they were incredibly smart at, I don't know, grammar. Sure, that's cool, but it was about that human. And so that's part of it. Community of care kind of idea that we need to have, sort of this rich soil in an environment where people have a sense of belonging and the learners want to be there. They really look forward to it, even online. And some of that is in interesting pockets. One last thing I'll tell you I'm working on more is teachers of sort of less commonly taught content areas. So maybe it's for me, it was the band room, but for my son, it was the art room. Something sort of a pocket where somebody feels this lovely energy and the sense of belonging. So I'm kind of doing some research on that right now and seeing how SEL figures in with those little spaces.
That's cool. Also, I just thought about, because we've done a lot of webinars this year around like the future of education, and the involvement of AI, gamification. Obviously, it's just becoming bigger and bigger. How can you see SEL integrating with those sorts of things like AI?
Yeah, I think it's sort of an interesting time we're in. When we think about everybody's thinking about AI, and I've been using it and saying, hey, students, here's a good way to use it, an ethically appropriate way, and here are some
Yeah.
things you need to watch out for, thinking about the ethics of it. But it does bring up some points with, sort of social emotional. One example I've thought of in some of this is that, sometimes people are embarrassed about certain things and they don't really want to interact with a human about something, but maybe there's a way to have some sort of AI discussion. Maybe that could help with SEL. And I've heard some people,
Mm.
wondering, does that help you with your self-growth if you're engaging in a way where you would be scared to ask a human or even go to therapy or something, which isn't my area of expertise, but I wonder about that. I wonder if AI could help for that. Yeah, technology, it's a double-edged sword. I mean, I see my kids overusing it, but then I also see, wow, it's great because they're able to do a zillion things that I could never dream of in 1987, So I don't know. I don't know. I think it's going to unfold, and I don't know if we really have a crystal ball. I do think we have to be careful about sort of some ethical things, but I also think incredible tools that could help, even maybe even a non-human entity maybe could help us with our human skills. I'm wondering about that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy to think where it could be sort of in 10 years' time.
Yeah,
And like you say, it's one of those things where it's like, oh, don't spend too much time on the screens and all of this, but everything is so digital now. And there's just more and more stuff, and then there's so much you can do with it. It's more efficient, and yeah, the reach with it is just insane.
absolutely. Yeah.
So I guess we'll wait and see what else comes out. So we've already talked quite a bit about SEL within schools and for teachers and the students, but what role do parents and families play in this? How can the schools engage them in supporting social emotional development at home as well?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I feel like I've been around a while now. My oldest is 22. So I have a 22-year-old and 18-year-old, two adults, and a 13-year-old teenager. And so I have had like a different perspective and sort of that parental engagement thing over the years, and each kid needed something different. And they were actually all in different schools. They went to Catholic school, public school, charter school, all different. So it can really run the gamut, so to speak. But in any case, it's that relationship building. So I think the learners, families, communities, SEL is true for all of them, and they're all part of that ecosystem. And so if there's one sort of, hurting part, let's say it's in the family or in the community, something, some trauma or something, we might see that manifest, right? That ecosystem really contributes to the big picture. And then you're going to have various degrees of engagement. I'm a little less engaged now as my 2 adult children are moving on. College, you don't really, you're not supposed to let them grow and fly, right? Grown and flown. And my youngest doing her thing. I try not to get too involved, but in the past I was very involved. And I think, sometimes if somebody is less involved, you might not see it, sort of like with online learning, that there is something happening in the home or the community, and that child is sort of manifesting that. So if we do have some ways to reach out and engage in, comfortable ways that aren't too much, not asking too much of a person. Sometimes they ask for you to volunteer a whole bunch or something like that. Maybe not everybody has the time, but ways that bring in the community, so that we understand that, yeah, the whole ecosystem is going to matter. And if you're not connecting with that whole ecosystem, the family, community, and all of that, you really won't be able to figure out what course to take and to help that student.
Yeah, it just shows the importance of, in schools and at home. Everything's so integrated, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And how can you see SEL being woven into core curricula across subjects? Some of the challenges and opportunities in doing that.
I love curriculum stuff. Like I said, it's cool. I was an administrator in curriculum for a year. I was our curriculum director, and it was super interesting. But I missed the teaching, so I went back. But I love to do that nerdy deep dive, and it is pretty cool
Mm.
because when you write curriculum, you start with the outcomes. You try to figure out what are those outcomes for the course, and you have measurable verbs, and there are Bloom's taxonomy verbs and everything. And typically they'll be about what will the student know and be able to do, whether it's higher ed or secondary or primary, at the end of the course. And so we can put SEL things in those outcomes and make that very clear from engineering the course from the beginning. A lot of people aren't there yet. That probably isn't going to happen for a lot of things like, let's say, a calculus class, right? But that's okay. I think thinking about, instead of the curricular piece, maybe thinking about the instructional piece is key, that disposition piece, because we can control a little more about that. So, we can try to engineer it into the curriculum, and there are ways to infuse it into assignments and smaller levels rather than sort of the broad course outcomes. But if we do focus more on sort of that dispositional piece for the teacher and sort of that, who's the best teacher you ever had? Well, that's because they're really good inside. It's their heart and the way they made you feel. Sort of thinking about teacher and the instructional part more, and then they do put that stamp on the curriculum, and it does happen, because it's holistic. It's not just sort of a course, right? You can't take a course or a program as much. You can have it, but if it's infused into everything, then it's much more of a school climate, and that's what we really want. Including the families and community building, realizing that here, and I know there as well, diversity figures into this, that we want everyone to feel a sense of belonging. So it's a much more holistic thing. So yeah, I'd like to see it more in the curriculum, but I think we might be more likely to see it in the people.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, looking forward, what do you think the future holds for SEL and education? Are there going to be some emerging trends or technologies that you're particularly excited about?
Well, you mentioned AI earlier, so I was thinking about that
Mm,
too.
yeah.
Yeah, I've been thinking about it a lot, and it's going so fast, like you said, and it's going to be fascinating. My son finished a degree in game design at RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology, last year, and a program that was aligned with game design was called human-computer interaction. And I thought, well, what's that? Tell me about that, to my son. And he's, oh, it's pretty cool. It's a small program. And he was saying, oh, it's about just that, like sort of, what does it feel like for a person to interact with a computer, and what can the computer do and can't it do, and the AI also. And so I'm certainly not an expert on human computer interaction, but I'm fascinated by how that might become part of what we do in so much of our work in education, especially for self-directed, like adult online learners, right? They could say, hey, I completed this module and all of this. I have some colleagues who have shared some super powerful examples sort of from that cutting edge, sort of human-like interactions from AI. And it's not just about sort of these large language models, and we're seeing a lot of that with ChatGPT, but sort of even emulating empathy, which is amazing to me, like that you could interact with maybe some sort of robot looking thing and it's almost like that show Black Mirror, which I know comes from the UK, and I really loved it. It really makes you think what's possible, almost science fiction. SEL is human, but like what feels human enough, and what will AI feel like? I am fascinated. I don't have an answer, but I can't wait to figure that and think about it a bit.
Yeah, it's exciting to see what's going to come.
Yeah.
So lastly, for educators who want to begin incorporating SEO into their classrooms, but maybe feel overwhelmed, where could they start? And are there any resources or first steps that you'd recommend?
Sure. Well, earlier I mentioned Castle. That is absolutely the big one.
Mm.
There are other frameworks, you can Google and find other frameworks to kind of play with and imagine, look at the sites for that. But CASEL is the main one. And then National does partner with Harmony Academy. Wonderful stuff. Their resources are mostly for grades 1 through 6, but yet I have found that so much of what they do works for that 80-year-old, that 40-year-old, that person in calculus in high school. It is just being human. It's just that they've framed it in a way where their materials are like that, but they do have free things available that are great on the site for Harmony. But I'd say really start small. It really depends on, where it is that you're teaching. Like I said, certain places here, if you're in a state like New York or Massachusetts versus say Florida or something like this, you're going to have a different environment. Different types of school districts are going to have different words for it. But if you start small and then do your research, really thinking about sort of going to those primary sources, because some people, particularly here, have become a bit heated about terms and, oh, if you say this term, you're on this side of the fence and I'm on this team and you're on that team. It's sort of like a football game or something. But
Very
really,
black and white, there's no grey area.
yeah, black and white, right? Exactly. Very kind of polarized. But really, if you do your research, you see it's really just human. I think, whether you're new to it or you have a lot of grounding in SEL, kind of start small, do your research, see what do I already do? What am I already doing from my heart that is human? And what do I want to grow in and encourage others to grow in, whether it's my students or someone else? And how can we have a more, caring, a climate of care in a way where we have everyone, it's sort of blooming bit by bit, whether from the top down or bottom up, that we sort of infuse that into everything we do.
Great advice there. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing all of your insights into social emotional learning and its transformative impact in education. It has been a real pleasure chatting to you today about how SEL is shaping the future of learning environments, and we're very excited to see, what's to come in education over the next few years. So, to our listeners, if you're passionate about education and you want to dive deeper into topics like SEL, innovation, and future trends, then make sure to register for Guest Dubai 2024. It's happening from November the 12th to the 14th at the Dubai World Trade Centre. So it's just around the corner now. And registration is completely free. So don't miss out on the chance to hear from thought leaders, explore the cutting edge solutions, and you can connect with global educators. So head to guesttobuy.com to secure your spot today. But thank you everyone for tuning in today to the GESScast, and we hope to see you at Guest to Buy in November. Thank you again, Dr. Maggie.
Thank you, Millie. It's been a pleasure.
Stop the recording.
Okay.